All right, take it away.
So tonight we're actually going to be introducing Unit 4, but before we get into Unit 4, we kind of wanted a heads up as to where you are using Giants right now. So like which unit you're in, how's it going?
I'm still just getting close to finishing up Unit 2.
Okay.
I've been implementing, like, we have Digital Elastic. Can you hear me? Am I doing okay?
You're breaking up a little bit, but we can make out what
No.
you're saying.
Can you hear me talking?
Yes. Oh.
No, I'm on an older computer.
Andy's gone.
Just going to say, and he's gone.
So I've been using, I haven't been using it since the whole year. I think we started in October, maybe towards the end of October, and we're just finishing up close to the end of Unit 2 as well. I've really enjoyed the curriculum and the resources that are in there. I'm from the elementary world. This is my first year in the middle school. I've taught fifth grade for about 9 years. So we've always been focused on the gradual release of responsibility, the I do, we do, and you do. But the thing I really like about this resource is I feel like it does it with the content. It's kind of like peeling back the onion a little bit till you get to the point. So it's kind of like an inquiry-based piece. Right. And I really like the questioning that the kids have kind of brought out in the whole thing. So, I mean, it's real new to me, but I really enjoy it. So in the tests, I know there was something in the agenda about the tests. You know, it's challenging, but those are the things that, you know, we really want them to know. And it goes back to that, you know, essential understanding that they need to take with them when they're done with the unit. So the only thing I did is I added a little bit of vocab work to some of those tests, just because we have a big EL population. About 25% of our school are EL students. So I kind of wanted to focus on that a little bit too. So that's my take on it.
Okay. I'm going to speak for both Andrea and I. The first year we did this, we found the same thing. The inquiry-based was real focused. We, I guess, drank the Kool-Aid very quickly because we really liked the curriculum. So then we were asked to climb on board and start writing with the program. So we are 100% invested for that reason. Have you had to add a lot of vocabulary extra?
No, primarily we go over it with each lesson, and we kind of introduce the words where I see kind of they fit within the steps.
Okay.
And then when they finish with their work early, sometimes I'll have them go on the Quizlet pieces, but it's more like that I want them to understand it at the end. So what I did is I just created a couple of pages on a Google Doc. And since we do have a big EL population, I've actually included some pictures in there as well, because I find that helps those students. And so it was just something that I thought maybe I could add a little bit too.
Okay, and you are aware that there's vocabulary with pictures and without?
Yeah, I've used some of it actually. I don't know if I'm copywriting there or not, but I've used some of them at least on the
yeah,
test.
We're good with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can do anything you want.
Okay.
So for those of you who came in as we were talking, we're just asking, like, where are you in Giants right now? How has it gone? Any comments or suggestions?
I'm Kathy. I mixed the first unit. One of the things that our school did was teachers listed what they felt might be a little bit lacking with kids coming in off of quarantine teaching. And so I had to fill some things in there. So for the first unit, I was pretty heavy on some basic geography concepts, and I mixed it. second unit I did was a lot of maps and more geography concepts. I'm on the third unit on the human environment interaction, and I'm doing that exclusively giants right now. And I love the thinking that these kids are going through right now. They're doing, I'm in person teaching, so it's different. I have people there. They're doing the what's in your wagon, and it's wonderful to listen to them. And they come to me with these questions, and I'm Irish. I don't answer a question I answer a question with a question. And so oh my gosh, one of the questions was, should we put the mule in the wagon? So I just said, okay, I want you to think about how much a mule would weigh, and you have a 900-pound limit. And what do you think? Would you take the mule for a ride and walk, or would you do something different? And they go back and you can just hear them hashing these kinds of things out. And then we do, I work with the science teacher. We're working on a bridges project where the kids will actually go down to the Flint River and test the water. And they test it for impurities and things like that. And then they do an action project based on that. So I'm working on that, and I'm doing the human environment interaction and the map kinds of parts with this project. But she really also does an excellent job of getting kids to think and to provide evidence for their thinking. So they're used to that, share your answer, and be challenged by other students. And it's wonderful. Just that we've just done what are you putting in the wagon so far. It's almost like I can't wait to get back with them, because they're really thinking, they're really talking, they're pulling this stuff about the basic geography of North America. And the other day, one of the kids said to me, I think geography must have an awful lot to do with history because, and then went on, and I'm like, yes, I mean, this is the most wonderful stuff when you hear at this point in the year, when you start to hear them using this and putting things together. It's fabulous. It's wonderful. I love it.
Later on in Unit 3, the poor kids who chose to go to place 3.
Yes.
They're going to find that was a terrible place during the Dust Bowl.
Yes. Yes. And I love you find out later, they're getting used to that technique. Oh, she's going to tell, we've had new kids come back from quarantine, and they'll say, oh, you'll get used to her. She's going to tell you something else later, and you're going to be really mad she didn't tell you. So, I love it. I'm exclusively right now in Giants, exclusively, without mixing much else in. And I really, really like it. Before that, I was blending both the Macy units, which they told me to use, and the Giants units, which I'm allowed to use because I'm COVID teaching. So I get away with a lot that I didn't before, but I'm sharing with administration how valuable it is and hoping that when they make the choice, they go that way. So love it.
Mr. Powers or Steve, are you back online?
Yes, I am. Am I better?
Yep.
Yeah, I had one of the old student Chromebooks that I thought I'd shoot it at, and it didn't work well. So yeah, now this is my teacher Chromebook that they got us this year, which is really nice. So we're currently just finishing up Unit 2. I've been supplementing with some reading. We have Digital Scholastic that we use, and so we've been pulling some books out of there and doing some reading comprehension. They're really concerned our kids are really low in reading. They're really behind in reading. So some ways that I can implement that reading along with. So we've been doing books about India, books about China, books about Japan, because we're in that densely populated. Now we're in the China, finishing up the China population. So no, it's good. I enjoy this too. So that's a lot of it too for me. Not that I don't trust the pacing, but I want to make sure I have enough to get it to the end of the year. And I know I will now. I got 3 units left, and I'm over halfway now. So
Right. Don't feel bad. We were just as concerned, and we weren't moving along as quickly.
Right. Okay.
So-
Thanks. Yeah, I was just a little concerned. I'm like, ooh, am I going too slow? I want to make sure I have enough at the end. I want to be sitting there twiddling my thumbs with them, like, Mr. Powers, what are we going to do? So, so good.
Right. No, none of us want to be there as teachers
Yeah.
with nothing to do. We understand that.
Yeah, and we're back face to face, half and half. So I'm like hybrid. I teach one 6th grade in face to face, and then one online during the day. So not at the same time, which is a blessing. So that's good.
Okay. Michelle, where are you at?
Well, I'm like making all these notes on things Kathy said. I'm like, oh, I'd love to talk to her more. So I'm in a district that has been doing everything remotely the whole year, and we had done a big purchase to support our learning platform as a buzz management system with the Florida Virtual Learning Platform, and they like purchased all the social studies and so where I'm at is because I really, really wanted to put in it Giants because I love it. And I'm hoping when we go into that 5-6 building next year that I can just incorporate it more and more and get more people on board. But so what I did to try to use that management system and the lessons in place was I started out with lesson 1 so we could get into all the ancient civilizations. And then because it happens to be a national curriculum, that's the historical one. So I'm like, here's our geographic inquiry perspective that we started with. And then I jumped into their first module, which was all studying those ancient civilizations, and did that. And then we jumped back and we said, okay. And then we started into the second part where we were looking at all of the rainy belt and looking at the latitudinal effects. And then we jumped back in to look at those civilizations along that latitude. And then we came back over. So we're looking at the continuing with Africa and looking at the climate, and then moving into the South American part, looking at the elevation, and then going back into the Florida Virtual, which focuses on those South American, the Mayan and the Aztecs and so I'm kind of going back and forth. Like I'm going from like, this is our geographic inquiry perspective. And then now here we're on our, buzz management with the Florida Virtual lessons and tying them together. So I'm behind. I'm still weaving through them with the hopes of being more solely focused on that, but I felt like I needed to use the system that was in place as I was incorporating things.
Right. But it's nice for us to hear that you're able to pull things and still incorporate it into the program you're using.
Oh, absolutely. And like the advantage of the other one is it's all like all the papers are there and they're just like pushing the buttons and reading them all and doing their little quizzes. But the advantage of this one is it's the icing, it's the cake, it's like the fun, it's the learning, it's the conversation, it's the parts that they're like, oh, we really love this part, and the parents are loving this part, and it's the part that makes it make sense. It's where they make those connections, and it's where they understand, oh, that is related. And so we kind of come back and forth, and then, okay, well, here's from historical perspective, here's learn more, and then, so I think it really weaves well.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. But it really sounds like for the majority of you, you're kind of in the same spot. And I know Andrea is teaching virtual, and she is about at the same pace at the What's in Your Wagon. So Andrea, do you want to talk about pacing from here out?
Yeah, so like Sharon just said, I've got my group, I'm 100% remote and have been all year. And so we're into Unit 3, just started, and they just did their first activity working on their list for What's in Your Wagon. And, just to reiterate some of the things that you've mentioned earlier, some of the other teachers have mentioned, that's I wasn't sure how this was going to work because I really enjoy the way, these class discussions and just, peer conversations can take off in a classroom. And so that's the one thing I was really worried about with being virtual in that. But we do regular Google Meets, and it seems like that's where I have kids that I teach both math and social studies, and they'll show up for the social studies, but they won't show up for the math Google Meets. So I don't know. I think that's also kind of puts a feather in our cap too. But and that's the other thing is that mentioning about the thinking, the critical thinking skills, and that inquiry, that curiosity that we keep wanting to spark and feed. That seems to be woven throughout because, in the past, I have had teachers that have said, I just want, I want a quiz or a test or something with facts. I want some handouts or written material that they can read and answer questions. And, we're talking knowledge or DOK 1 knowledge. So I love the fact that we can take this and push the kids in their thinking a little bit further so that would help support them, not just in social studies, but obviously in other classes as well, other subject areas. So I'm really pumped about that. Like I said, we just started our second semester where this is our second week of second semester. So I try to look for some natural breaks in the units or in the pacing so that it ends or starts what is works with my calendar, my district calendar in that. So we finished up 2 and then started right away with 3. So we're going forward with that. We're looking at unit 3 taking about 6 weeks. That's going to push us into starting unit 4 about mid-March. And so what we end up with is unit 4 is most likely going to be split between, a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks before spring break, and then a few weeks after spring break. So about 3 weeks before, 3 weeks after spring break. And that'll get us to the end of April, first part of May, and that will be unit 5. So if you kind of think about it, if you're following our pacing, that's how we're trying to chunk it so that we have enough time for everything, and we don't get we continue moving forward, and we try to find those breaks as we can. So that's pretty much where we're at with that. So again, we mentioned about assessments. We have in the lesson guides, we do have a variety of different like Google Forms. There's some that you can print. A lot of them I put into Google Forms just because that's easier for me online with my students. But those are kind of like the short little brief little quizzes in that. But then we also have the unit assessments as well. And that, as you've noticed, is a combination of both selected response and then also a constructed response for students. And we didn't want to make it too labor intensive for teachers to grade those constructed responses. So we kind of kept those brief and just really dialed into just getting to the point with it. So those are some of the things that we've, are going to continue with. We also have some other things that, some other like supportive activities in that, like the vocabulary. We use Quizlet a lot. The clickable maps, Carol will talk about that maybe towards the end if anybody has any questions. But there's a lot of different places where we've tried to add some additional support that also will give teachers an opportunity to kind of decide where they want to go with it, especially like with the clickable maps. We usually give a list of questions to follow with that. So someone's, has those activities already in place, or you can kind of take off from there and maybe either guide the students a little bit more or give them a little bit more free rein on what they can do with those clickable maps, trying to build those connections, those geographic connections by looking at conditions in those different locations around or regions around the world. So that's pretty much what I've got. Carol, did you want to add anything about what we have for Unit 4?
If you've ever used this in the past, Unit 4 has changed. Unit 4 now has Europe and it makes so much more sense. It's like, oh, why didn't we do that earlier? So you will see that Europe becomes a kind of a core element when we talk about culture and the spread of culture, partly because Europe had so many colonies and therefore encountered other cultures. So we'll be seeing more about Unit 4. Unit 5, it's like, I'm glad you're not ready to jump into Unit 5 because I'm not ready to give it to you. It really needs some reworking. We took Europe out of Unit 5 and put it in Unit 4. I think Unit 5, our last one, is going to be totally about issues. We've built a lot of background in the other units, in the previous units, and you can pick an issue if you want. One of those issues is going to be trade. Another one of those issues is going to be immigration. And another one of those issues is going to be the pandemic. And what brings trade, immigration, and the pandemic all together is they're all about something spreading. Do people spread? Do goods spread around the world, or does a disease spread around the world? So that it's very geographical, but there's an awful lot of governmental policy and economics in what we're heading toward. So let's see, are we ready to go into Unit 4? Any questions?
Okay. So we're going to start in Unit 4, Lesson 1. And again, Unit 4 is about culture. And we're going to take a closer look at Europe, South Asia, and Southwest Asia. Most specifically India, and then also the Middle East. And so when we are taking a look at that, one of the first things we do, just to get the kids used to cultural characteristics, is we talk to them about language and languages. So I'm gonna, let's see, share my screen. And and we've got this in our presentation and that, but if you're in the class and that, it's kind of fun to put some of this information up on the board when they first walk in. They're really challenged by this first one, what it might say, what you think it might be. We even ask them about what languages do you think those are? And so it's really interesting to see some of the feedback that you get from students as far as that goes. And then, of course, we go into what they are, what the words or what they mean, and the different languages that they're in. A lot of discussion about that. If you're fortunate enough, you'll have kids that are familiar with a second language, or maybe it's the language spoken at home and they can share some of that. They're kind of at a funny age. Sometimes they like to share and sometimes they don't. So you got to kind of approach that carefully. And then it just goes into taking a look at, how much of the world is speaking these languages, because we tend to just focus on what's going on in our community, in our location, or in our country. And so when we take a worldwide view of that, that's when we start to see that, they're kind of pleasant or surprised when they find out what some of these languages are. So this slide, and let's see, there's one right after it that has some questions that go along with it. I give that out, or we'll put that into our digital notebook, and that is, it looks like this. So they'll have one of these. And so again, not only do we identify what culture is, but then we'll start to take a look at those top 12 languages. We also include that the size of these circles is in relation to the percentage of the population, world population that speaks it, or, you know, that there's a large group. They're able to pretty much finish up writing out the names. I usually do that quite often as a group activity in that. And then they've got a few questions to answer on the next page in that. So that's a really nice introduction to it. If you didn't catch it on the one of the first few slides in the PowerPoint here is this translategoogle.com. And so in the past, I have put that in my Google Classroom and that. And I'm going to tell you, when kids get a hold of that, they love typing their name in. They love typing all kinds of things in there, and seeing what that means and how it's translated into different languages and that. So it's a great resource for them. You just got to kind of be careful with it too. And then the last thing we do with it, we do look at some data, obviously. And then we talk about the relationship, because they find out that Chinese, or Mandarin Chinese, is the most spoken language in the world. They always think it's English. And then we talk about how that is. And usually there's someone in the class that makes that connection, that it's because we just came off of studying China and its large population, that now they're starting to see that. And so they don't necessarily think of it as that it's spread around the world, the Chinese languages, but that there's just so many people in China that are speaking them, as well as in other places. But then that's where they start to understand that. The last thing that we do is take a look at, we use an example here of, for instance, Spanish, which another spoken language, and we talk about where that started and where it spread, and that eventually becomes another point of discussion for us. But it's a really nice way to kind of start in that whole theme of culture. I think that was pretty much it. So what else do we have for culture, Sharon? I'm going to stop sharing.
So we go from language into religion. Whoops, except for I am not there. I am not there at all. So if you can give me just a moment.
And if your students, when we started like the population unit, and they had to figure out percentages and what percent of the world's population was on each continent, usually there's like a lot of incorrect answers right away, and we have to kind of talk it through and work through it and start to take a look at it. We look at the change in population from the year 1 to the year 2016, that kind of thing. You see the same kind of thing hit the students when it comes to language, and then when they also look at percentages of the world's population as far as different religions. And so they're usually surprised about the data that we use, and that what they're thinking in their situation, and what we are showing them is happening around the world. So just like thinking that English was the most spoken language, then they have to realize that, okay, there is something different out there, and why is that? And so the same thing, hopefully we start to get them to ask more questions about, why is that a different religion than what I expected to be the most dominant religion in the world. So it's just another way of getting them to think and be a little bit more curious.
So my computer is not recognizing the Zoom program.
Do you want me to share my screen, Sharon, and I can?
Sure, that might be easier at this point, because I don't know. It keeps asking me to go back into Zoom after I get on my screen.
Okay.
So you can bring up the religion
characteristics, the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, will do. Let me share the screen and
So when we go into religions, we are going into talking about the 5 primary religions. And we're talking about the ones that have the largest followers. Most of our students really feel that Christianity is the religion. Some of them know about Judaism, and that's about where it stops, unless if they are in some way connected to someone who follows one of the other religions. We don't get into the nitty gritty of any of the religions. We're looking at the basics. We want the students to understand what some of the symbols are, what they pray from, and who they pray to. Can you advance me, Andrea? So they find out when you start talking to them, you talk about the branches of it. You'll find some of the students are very surprised that Christianity includes Catholics, Protestants, which are Baptists and Lutherans. They think it's very separated, that their religion is the religion, and they don't realize that it encompasses more. So you typically will get a fairly good conversation just introducing these and introducing the fact that there are branches. When you talk about Islam and talk about the Sunni and the Shia, they don't have any idea what those are. Those are new words to them. I don't dwell on it a lot initially. I just tell them that it's just like, Protestants and Catholics, they're all part of Islam. Then we have in their notebook, they either cut and paste, or you can just have them make the columns, and we're going to have them talk about where the religion began, and then that symbol that we want them to start recognizing. There's an activity, if you're in the classroom, that you can print off. You would have to modify it some, but they actually do the activity of sorting the cards. And the students really like that, and it gets good conversation going on. But I know transference of things right now is a concern, so you'd have to think about how to do it in your classroom.
the buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, can you click me forward? So when we start looking at these cards, and these are part of the cards that you can put up in your room or show in your room, can you go back a slide, Andrea? You're going to notice that we're having them start looking at the symbols. And when my students looked at Hinduism, they looked at that symbol and they, in their minds, connected it to a fancy H. Islam, a lot of them knew the symbol already, they just didn't know it represented Islam, and beginning in the Middle East. Judaism, they were already familiar with. Can you go back one slide, Andrea?
Sure.
I'm going to figure out what's going on. Buddhism, my students could not remember, and one of them said it's like a captain's wheel on a boat. And so they started going, Buddhism was boat. And it was just to get them to start connecting those symbols. Christianity with the cross, they were most familiar with.
Keep going.
Yep. So then we have them start looking at buildings and pictures, and they have to try and determine what religion it actually matches. I actually took all the words off my cards and only gave them the pictures because I wanted them to start realizing that if they see the cross, it's the Christian church. You know, the towers are the mosque, and then they look the Jewish symbol. Then we talked about, they're familiar with the Bible, whatever version they study. We talked about the Quran and the Torah. Students have heard these words. Several of my students knew about the Torah, which I found unique, but it was because of NCIS. And one of the characters in NCIS spoke of the Torah. And so they knew the word, they just didn't understand what it was. Then we have them look at either how they pray or what they pray to. Students are familiar with Jesus and familiar with Buddha, but you'll find that a lot of them just thought Buddha was a cute little figurine who was fat. They never realized he was a symbol to anything. They are familiar with Muslims due to current events, if you do current events in your room. And once again, the praying wall, I'm trying to remember why they knew that, but there was another TV show that they would go, oh yeah, we know about that. So they do know more than you realize, but sometimes they don't have it connected properly. Hinduism is the temple buildings. I mean, they need to know that. Usually when you bring up the slide of the gods of Hinduism, Shiva, they're surprised that it looks like a female. The Vishnu is pretty much anything but Brahma with the 4 heads and the extra arms. They really are totally blown away with, and they don't understand why anyone would find something like that sacred. This is when Mahatma Gandhi is introduced, and he will be referred to throughout the unit. Then we give them a little matching quiz, and these are the pictures without the words. But you'll find that they actually do very well with it. I actually would give them a quiz that was graded, and my average score was a 75 or 80%. So this is something the kids enjoy. If you're able to use the game that's included in the unit, I think it helps enhance and brings up more questions. But this is a nice, tight presentation for religion.
And that has the answers and all that.
And then these are the answer keys. Yep.
Yeah.
Andrew, if you'll go back one.
Sure.
We do have some music that allows students to hear music that they may have heard before but didn't know what it was connected to. I typically either played it at the beginning of the class or at the end of the class. And then we would, as a game, talk about, I would just play something and they would try to determine which religion it fell into.
The last couple of slides are like the answers and how they've got them grouped together for each religion.
And these are all PowerPoints, so if teachers want to edit, they certainly can take off clues or add clues. Our whole point is to say there's not just one religion in the world. There's really quite interesting differences.
Right.
Okay.
I grew up in 6th grade thinking everybody was Lutheran, so.
All right. Let me exit full screen here. Okay. Anything else, Sharon?
No, I think that's about it.
Should, Andrea, would you want to pop open the one about numbers, or I could try to share. If I can't share, I'll have you pop open the numbers for religion?
Oh, yeah, the,
Should I try to share mine?
yeah, you can if you, yeah, because I've opened.
I'll give it a try. Let's see. Religion numbers present. Let's see. Share. You guys can see me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just real quickly, we can you see it okay this way?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Again, culture is all sorts of things that we think about and act on, we work on, we own, we use. The point is that culture is learned and shared. It's not just one individual person. Just like children learn languages, I think they learn about the religion that their family belongs to. And what we're going to do is I needed to take the categories for which I had data. So we introduced some characteristics of Buddhism and Christianity. And we saw a little bit about Hinduism and Islam. Folk religions are a little bit harder to explain. I've got religions in alphabetical order here. They're often it's a worship that involves worshiping nature, for example. This is a new word, not affiliated, being a category in religion. Not affiliated means people who have no religion, when they're asked what their religion is, they say, I don't have a religion. Or sometimes they're intentionally atheists, they don't want to believe in God, or agnostics. So we have these big categories of religions. There are other smaller religions. And Judaism, we're going to see, has a small number of followers. It's important to know about, but it's a small number of followers. We again, we repeat the cards, and we've done that before, so I'm going to move on. But I need to have the children know that it is possible that people will say, I have no religion. Okay, so which do you think of all of these religions that we have listed here, which one do you think has the largest number of followers in the world? And we will give you some choices. There is a religion over on the right-hand side over here that has, at least when this was recorded or researched in 2010, had more than 2 billion followers. And we have another religion that has 1 billion followers, and then less than 500 million. So would you be able to match the 2.2 billion? Who would you match that to? Well, the reveal comes next. And we have Christianity as having the most followers in the world. If the students are used to percentages, that's not quite 1/3 of the world. Coming in second is Islam, not affiliated, has more than 1 billion people. Hinduism has more than 1 billion people. Other religions don't have as many people. Does anything surprise you, or do you think would surprise the students in this ranking?
I know the not affiliated always blows their mind because they just can't imagine that. It always seems to be a huge discussion point in the classroom and that. So I think it's just, it's again, looking beyond themselves or their community And they are always seem to be surprised with that.
They didn't grow up in the 1950s like me, where we were told how the evil communists forced people not to have a religion. And so it would be obvious to me that there were people who weren't supposed to have a religion or they'd get in trouble. But yeah, that's, we have just a little bit more, we can review, do the students remember the top 4? And I'd like them to remember the top 4 because this is going to come up again when we talk about South Asia. 2 of the major religions in South Asia are in the top 4 when we get to that, and that is Islam and Hinduism. And in South Asia, in the time period that we're looking at, followers of Islam and followers of Hinduism are going to be in conflict. There are religious groups, maybe not over beliefs, but over other things, religious groups that do not get along. So I think, I added one more thing. We just said that Christianity was about 32% of the world. But when you add together Protestant Christians and Roman Catholic Christians in the US, Christianity is about 63% of the US. In that respect, our country doesn't reflect the world. And I'm going to show you the next slide. This is a concern of people in Detroit when I've gone to work with teachers in Detroit. It seems to people in Detroit that Islam is quite important, and it is in parts of Detroit. But in the US, Islam is only about 1% of the population, where it's about 23% of the world and growing. Hinduism is a very small number of people, a very small percent in the United States, but 15% of the world, primarily because India has such a huge population. So we'll stop there and do. Can somebody? Oh, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. All right. I think Andrea is next with Europe.
Yeah, but even before we get started with that, there's a couple more things in our Unit 4, Lesson 1, lesson guide that follow, like after the religion presentation, and then we see the data, the numbers that Carol just went through. We also have a presentation about maps and where these religions are located, and where they can see that they're either concentrated in one area or they're spread out a little bit more. And it shows it on world maps and that. So that kind of leads us into then when we start looking at, how did these religions spread or not spread? And so, we get to the point where we start talking about Europe because of how unique Europe is and how it accelerated the spread in some of these some of these religions, as well as languages. So we introduce Europe. And then there's a couple of things, most of the time the kids in Michigan seem to get it fairly well because we're talking about peninsulas and, they can identify with that for the most part, but I'm trying to find my one that I had open. Okay. So when they take a look at Europe, Carol's broken our PowerPoint up into three different presentations. The first one is really short. I'm not going to go into it. It's just a it just talks about, is Europe, the whole discussion about, is Europe a continent or a subcontinent? You know, there's people that refer to it as the whole landmass as Eurasia and that. So it just addresses that just briefly. But then the second presentation is where we get into the actual, you know, the geography, the physical geography of Europe and how that's impacted on the cultures in Europe. And so let me share my screen and just go through a few of these slides with you. Okay, share. There it is. So when we go through the presentation with the kids in that, you know, we have a locator map, show them where it is, and then we start talking about it. Most of them by this point, they recognize the boot, you know, for Italy and that. But we talk about this irregular shape and how it has so many different peninsulas when you really take a closer look at it and that. And because of that physical geography, how it has impacted the people, the history, the culture, and all that. We go through peninsulas and what they are. Again, I like this this picture that you kind of have the kids build in their head about a peninsula is like a room with only one door. And actually in the classroom, when I was in the building last year, we did that. And we, you know, walked down the hallway and talked about the different teachers' rooms were actually different countries in Europe. And so what was going on in one teacher's classroom, especially if it was like a science teacher compared to the teacher next to them that was a math teacher, that there was a different activities and different things going on. And very similar to in Europe, on these different peninsulas that are part of these different countries, how their identity is so unique to their and shows their culture, and why they in some cases were very isolated and did not mix or share their cultures and that. And, you know, if you're going through the ancient civilizations and that, you talk about the city-states in ancient Greece. But we start to show quite a few of these. And we get into some things like history as well, just a real brief history. The kids really like to pick up on this. Even if they haven't had the ancient civilizations yet, they've heard of the Greeks and the Romans and that. Like I said, they can always find Italy on there. And we just keep reminding them of all these different peninsulas. And then they eventually, we talk about it as being either a hallway with many doors, many separate rooms, or like many different closets, so they're really small. This goes into a little bit more into the history, and it's kind of fun. There's a lot of pictures. Carol's done a great job adding a lot of pictures to kind of build those pictures in our students' minds about it. But we do eventually get to, and we talk about what are some of the barriers that not only because of the peninsulas, but also then these mountain ranges that were isolating the different groups. And let's see, we get down, whoops, I think it's this one. Talk a little bit about the comparison, the size, things like that. And then, yeah, 50 different countries. So they start to understand. We kind of talk about it like here in the United States. I use that, and I talk to them that if we're here in Michigan and we have a language that's unique and a culture that's unique for Michigan, and then if we headed south and we went to Indiana and they had their own language, they had their own culture, their own currency, things like that, how challenging that would be to be able to travel and communicate with each other. And they usually pick up on that fairly well. there's a third presentation that also, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, that just goes into also into the coastline and that. And then obviously, because of the physical geography of peninsulas and that, a lot of these countries with this extended coastline, because of their peninsulas, were able to establish, became really good boat builders. And so they eventually lead to creating these very powerful navies and very strong ships that can sail greater distances. And then now their reach starts to extend beyond just their peninsula or just their location in Europe. I did throw some of these. There's two different activities that go along with this that Carol has, and I put those into, there's a paper copy, and then there's also the Google's, or I put it into a Google form. So those are just a couple of things to start thinking about Europe, and then that kind of leads us into the age of exploration, where they, start to travel, looking for other locations, for raw materials, for markets, things like that. And of course, when they do, they bring along their language and their religion.
Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota and very far from Lake Superior. And as a sixth grader, it was incomprehensible to me that water could be so important, or that being able to use ships on water could be so important. And what we're stressing with Europe is how so much of Europe is close to water, so much of Europe has ports, and Europe is going to get connected to the rest of the world in a way that we talk about globalization today, but Europe was the core of globalization in the past because it reached out long distances across water.
Okay, so we're at, whoops, yeah, I'm unmuted. We're at about 5:45, so we might as well keep going. And we just have a few more things on lesson 1 that we want to make sure that we cover. So again, when we started out with culture. We talked about some cultural characteristics, talked about some data that goes along with that for language and religion. Then we get into Europe, and that kind of gets us thinking about, how some of these cultures had spread. And then, so now we're going to start to take a look at what culture looks like in different parts of the world. And so there's this really cool website, and it's from Gapminder, I think is the name of it. But they have, it's called Dollar Street, and it's basically this, it started out as, I think it was some kind of a college or university project, and that students had to take pictures of different people and items to give examples of culture in different locations around the world. And it's just grown from there. So they've got this great database of pictures, and what they've done is combine them or put them into this website, and then put them into categories so that you can start to do some comparisons. So I'm going to show you, it's a brief description that we share with the students. Let me share my screen. And then, let's see. So we talk about, again, things that people have that also kind of reflect their culture or have become a part of their culture. So we call it material culture. And as we talk to the kids about this, we're going to look at not only like one location. We could look at one country and then look at the differences within just one country based on their income. So these economic factors come into play. And so again, we can take a look at, let's say, for instance, citizens in China. We just finished up our unit 2 of China. And so we can go ahead and take a look at that. And we would see both examples that reflect people that live at the higher incomes in China, as well as people who are living in with some of the lowest incomes in China, and pretty much everything in between. So it does give them a kind of a snapshot of what is happening in, or what it looks like in some of these different locations around the world, these different countries. So you can do a comparison just within one country only. This is the website, that link that takes you there. It's like I said, it's a pretty significant project with over 30,000 photos. It just keeps growing. They've added some videos, and those are really short and brief. Kind of reminds me of like little videos you take on your cell phone and that. That may show some action or activity of like, kids playing outside, what it looks like, just different things like that. And so there's not only will it have pictures, but at the very top of the screen, there's like this little, it looks like a street, as I talk to my students about, and that there are different houses or buildings along this street. And so, for instance, if this was, I could see from the categories already for this screenshot that this is about families. There would be pictures about families, and this is comparing all over the world, and it's by income. Not only will it show us what it looks like maybe in some of the poorest communities, but also in some of the richest communities as well, and everything in between. The other thing to consider is you can kind of see that it's really, there's a lot of buildings or a lot of symbols here towards the lower end of this street, down towards the left side, which is the poorest group. And then as we move up to the right, to the richest group, we see that the houses are a little bit more scattered. There's fewer of them because obviously there are fewer families or people, a percentage of the people that have that type of income. So that's another detail to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at it. So then you go to, they do, if, especially I think it's useful or helpful for teachers, you can go in there, it kind of takes you through a quick tour. It shows you all the little bells and whistles. It's pretty simple. And then you can get started with it. So within this presentation, we also, included some examples in that. So I'm going to pull it up so it presents, and you can see it a little bit bigger. So again, here we have, look at the categories, and this is families, and we've identified this as the entire world, and this is by income. And so they do give us some information about, where some of these families are from. Because this category here is the world, we do need to look at some of those different countries in that, and also then the amounts of their income in that. Kids are so good at picking up clues from pictures. And so they really start to take a look at comparing and contrasting. And I think not only do they just look for, they look for a lot of different things. They look for what is unusual, what is different. They're looking at some of these pictures and saying, what is that in the background, or what is that they're holding, or whatever. But they also then, when you start to guide them, if you're in the classroom, if you're doing this virtually, whatever, is that you want to just make sure that you're also kind of pushing them or guiding them along the way to look at some comparisons and in your own way, kind of feed them some of those cultural characteristics, like, for instance, dress and, some of the material things that they have, the types of pots and pans when we look at kitchens, or the the kinds of vehicles and things like that for transportation, and even just the environment. You can get glimpses of what their community looks like, or what type of climate conditions they live in, things like that. The kids will pick up on a lot of that stuff. So it does show you, you can go in. This is what I typically do with my students, is that I go into and I have them choose 2 countries, and I usually have them, I don't let them choose the United States. So I have them choose 2 countries, and I have done it in the past where I've let them just choose any 2 countries. And then I've said 2 countries in 2 different continents. Or if I feel like I want to reinforce what we've already looked at, I might say in Asia and in South America, or in Africa and in Asia. So you can really tailor it to what you think would work well for your students. So you choose, they can go through and do a quick checklist and find a couple of countries. Let's see. Oh, wait, that's not, there we go. And then we're going to take a look. So we did this comparison of Nigeria and China. And again, 2 things to keep in mind: the poor are on the left, the rich are on the right. And so looking at the category up here, we chose which was homes. And then these little houses, these little symbols up here on the street, those indicate that these are where these pictures would fall into. So we see some of these with on the lowest end of the street, on the poorest end, with a very small income, and that's what their homes look like. So again, I always, we talk about, what do you see? What kind of materials do they use? Are they, what kind of homes are they? And they notice some are in apartment buildings, some are single family homes, some are made very simply or rudimentary, and some are a little bit more elaborate. And now they can compare where they see them. I usually, I talk to the students about not only identifying the similarities, but also differences, and then taking notes on that. And I'll share a slide that I use. It's just a simple table that they could put the information into. When I had them use a paper and pencil notebook, I just had them create a chart in their notebook, in their social studies notebook, and they had to write down the 2 countries that they were comparing. And then they had these, I gave them specific categories, and I always allowed them to have a choice, 1 or 2 topics to choose from. So again, when you go through it, kitchens, you see some of those things. We talk about what that looks like. What do they recognize? Can they figure out what some of the things are that they're looking at? And this is toilets. This one always gets the kids cranked up, because they're just amazed of the differences there. And again, we just talk about, those are differences that we see all over the world too. Something as simple as just the kind of eating utensils that they have. So you can make it as simple, or you can put more into it and get more discussion out of it, or you can leave it up to the students to make that decision what they want to compare. There are some questions and things like that at the end, just to kind of summarize it. So even if students didn't have the ability to go online and do it themselves, if they didn't have a device or they didn't have internet access, they could have still done this activity just by looking at the 2 examples, that Nigeria and China, that we put into the PowerPoint. Let's see. And of course, we always give you the answers. The other thing I was going to show you is, let's see if I have it up. Oh, I got to stop sharing for a second so I can find it. Oh, so I'm going to show you Dollar Street. That's what I wanted to show you. So I'm going to show you the actual Dollar Street. Here it is. So it's easy to get to. And so, you know, it starts you out here, families. I think the one that I did when I did a comparison, I chose, let's see, I think I chose India because I knew we were getting into India. And then I also chose Brazil just because it was just a different continent and that. And then I'm going to click OK. So it was already on the category for families, but notice that when you do put in a topic, it will give you related topics. It will give you popular topics, or it's just in alphabetical order, and there is a ton of them. So again, one of the things that, you know, kids like to look at are beds or bedrooms. They like to see what the differences are. Do they look like their bedroom, or, you know, they just, pets is another really popular one. And again, we also, you know, take a look at what those incomes are and what kind of pets they have. And, you know, we talk about what the pets, you know, how they look similar to maybe what we have. And do we have some similarities there? It seems like everybody enjoys having a pet. So again, it's pretty wide open. I haven't come across any, and it's really well maintained. This this website is, and so again, keep that in mind as you go through that. The last thing I was going to show you is that you can choose. I'm going to just click off Brazil, and so I'm just going to have India there by itself. And I can do a comparison just in one country alone with the, you know, from both ends of the Dollar Street, from the richest families or low, family incomes to the poorest, and see what are some of their similarities and what are their differences. So it is kind of interesting then when you are looking at things like their homes. That's another, you know, really powerful indication of what those economic differences may be. So again, it's kind of wide open how you want to handle that. I'm going to stop sharing that screen. And
Students really enjoy this site.
oh my gosh, you can't get them off of it. I mean, you got to really watch for the time and that. And I've done where I've put the link for it into Google Classroom and that. And I'll tell you, they come back in the next day. They've been up looking at all kinds of stuff. And, oh, here it is, the Dollar Street. No, that's not the one. But anyhow, it is, I'll just share it anyhow. This was.
Can I ask a question? Is that like because I've got it up on my other computer. Is that like a yearly or a monthly income for them? Do you know what the income represents?
Yeah, it's on there. I think it's on the, where am I at? Let me find I've got like 8 million tabs open. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm pretty sure that is, now I thought it was monthly, but it could be wrong. It could be annually. And okay. I think it's, I know it comes up when you do the quick tour.
Okay.
So
I skipped the tour.
Yeah. And I haven't done the tour in a while, so I couldn't say, but I definitely would check that out before you share that with the kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Oh, I know that. I just thought when I was looking at it, I'm like, ooh, it doesn't say, but
yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to do, I thought I had it up. No.
I think I see dollars per month on the info page.
That's what I thought it was. But, you know, I just wanted to make sure. But I just have, I can't find it. I just had a real simple table and that I created. And I put it into a Google slide because my kids are doing their notebooks digitally. But when I did it with my students, I mean, they just wrote it in a notebook, and I had them put the 2 countries, they put down their categories on one side. I gave them, for this one, I gave them 10, or excuse me, I gave them 8, and they had 2 that they could choose from. And then they had to write details of what they saw and what was similar and what was different. And so again, there's just a lot of different ways that you can put as much into it, or you can just make it, or you can just demonstrate it to the students, if you don't want them to go through and do that whole investigation. But I know it is it really opens their eyes to other cultures and disparities in income in different locations around the world. And that's part of what, we're trying to do, is to get them to think beyond themselves or their community, to especially with their concept of world geography, to embrace, what's happening in other parts of the world. Not to make them feel bad about anything, but it's just to, give them knowledge and make them understand, get a better understanding of what people are dealing with.
Well, and I found like the first 5 minutes, they're just really into looking at everything, and you hear all the giggles and the comments. But then when you really start talking to them about, so what do you see? What do you notice? They become very serious about everything. They realize, looking at the pictures, and Roy, you are spot on for toilets. They love the toilets in the bathrooms. They are humored by it initially, and then they're almost taken back and going, really, that's what they have. And so you get some really good conversations going.
Yeah, and they get real quiet there for a while, and you can tell they're working.
Yeah.
they're investigating. They're like, or somebody sees something, and I put in this, and look what they use for toys. I think on one of them they used for toys. It was on the lower income in Brazil. It was a plastic water bottle. Yep, that might be a toy for, if that's what they have. Kids can play with anything. So, yeah, that's one of my favorite lessons in that, and it really brings it home what's going on in other cultures, because the pictures are phenomenal.
So, Andrea, I had problems getting back on. So can you I don't even want to mess with my screen right now. Can you just go into the tolerance for me?
Yeah, for tolerance. Is that the one, Sharon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Whoops, that's in.
Should be just below you.
Yeah. Oops, there it is.
So your suggestions were great, Roy, but I don't know what's going on, but I had a black screen for the longest time after I was back in the meeting. So I'm just not going to play while we're in the meeting.
Okay, I'll share my screen.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll make it
nice to have some backup.
Yeah. So we're going to do an activity, and it's talking about tolerance, and it's really not having the kids learn tolerance. It's making them aware of the differences in our culture. It's a very simple activity. It might be a little more difficult being virtual, but we have kind of figured out a way you can do it. In the classroom, it's not a problem at all. But we're basically using pictures, and we're separating the class into 2 groups. So if you have to keep your kids in the classroom, just have half of them turn around. There's a worksheet that's going to ask them, what do you see? And I just had my kids stay quiet. Other years I was able to have half my kids go out into the hallway. But you're showing one group of students a picture, and it's something they're very familiar with. And they're going to talk about their emotions, how they learned about it, how they feel, and then you have them switch positions and you ask the exact same questions, and we've only done a very slight change in the picture. This is not our activity. It's one we found. We have permission from the group to use it widely. In fact, they were actually quite excited that we were using it in our program so that more people get to experience it. So we start out just talking about different head coverings from different cultures. And we talk about the hat on the left first and then the hat on the right. And what does that tell us about? I mean, who wears the hat on the left? Initially, when we did this activity, my responses was always my grandfather or my great-grandfather, a businessman. Nowadays, the fedora is coming back in, and so you'll hear other responses. And of course, the right they're very familiar with, and they said just about everybody, men and women wear those. And so we talk about, you know, who dresses these two ways. What is the assumption if you see someone wearing the hat on the left to one that's on the right? And you'll get all kinds of responses, but they typically fall into that businessman dressed up. He's got something or a place to go. The person on the right is more casual, maybe sports oriented. So you start seeing that they have definitive responses for it, as most of us would. And then we talk about the feelings that people have with these hats, which are pretty generic. There's nothing really surprising on this. Then we separate them into two groups. If you're doing this virtually, splitting them into two separate sessions, we have found works where you're able to go in and do the instructions with each group separately and then have them sit there while you do it with the other one. It doesn't take long, and then have them come back together. So each group is going to see a man, they're going to see a person, which they will assume is a man, that has a hat. And they'll answer the questions. And I typically guide them through them just to kind of keep them on pace so that they finish. And I always tell them, you know, when we're done, you're going to have time to complete your answers, and they don't have to be complete sentences. We just kind of want your quick thoughts. So these are the questions. What kinds of emotions instantly come when you see the picture? Where do you think you've learned about the individual? Who taught it to you? You know, has media made a difference? And you take them through the 6 questions. So we're not diving really, really deep. We're just getting that initial thought process. Separate them out. We've already talked about that. And then when you bring them back together, I typically start with the questions. So what kind of emotions did you find? And all they know is the picture they've seen. So, you know, what kind of emotions? And one group will be giving you their set, and the other group has a totally different set of answers. And they start looking at each other and going, we didn't see the same picture. You showed us 2 different pictures. They immediately catch on. Andrea, can you just, move forward? So on the next slide, we're going to actually show you both pictures at the same time, which will answer the question for you. These are the 2 pictures. So you show one, basically the, you know, Santa hat with the beard. We keep the same beard, and now there's a turban on the other. The responses you get from the students are very different. Some children struggle with the Santa hat as to where did you learn about this person? Because they really don't know where they learned about it. They've just known about him forever. The other half, you'll get an assortment of answers. Some of my students have a neighbor who wears a turban, or the local person at the grocery store they see, you know, either every week or periodically. So they have typically different responses than other students. But the majority of them will tell you that they're kind of hesitant on the person on the right. And then we talk about why. Why does the hat make a difference? And they become extremely matter of fact with these answers. Some of their answers will, kind of take you back, and I never got into arguments with them. I just said, well, why do you think you feel that way? Very few of our students have really had I'm saying ours where I taught, had interactions with people in turbans. There were a few, but it would always end up that the reason they felt that way is most of the time they see pictures, it was through our current events, and the media often shows them yelling, screaming, fighting. And so they have internalized that, and they have this automatic emotional connection that may not be anywhere as accurate. And so we talk about that. It's a quick activity, probably will take up a class period or the majority of one. So I used to introduce Andrea's lesson, and then we would go to this. And if we had time at the end, they got to go back onto Dollar Street. I didn't let them play on Dollar Street until we had this lesson done. But it's just to make them aware that we make some quick decisions about people based on what they're wearing. And it connects really well with Dollar Street because we're dealing with the more fortunate and less fortunate people. So the activity is 100% from another group who deals exactly with
Have it on there.
judging. I don't remember. I think it's on the last screen. Yeah, at the bottom, tolerance organization. And you'll see
Southern poverty. Yep.
Yeah. So it's teaching tolerance. And if you back up just a couple slides, we had a couple or one other slide showing different forms of hats. The middle one, they all thought was Kiwanis Club from parades. So that was the quick connection. But once they saw all the hats, most of them had said they had seen them at least in pictures. So it's a tolerance activity that's fairly easy to do. The kids get involved in the discussion, so it usually runs quite well. And you can print anything and everything on this lesson. It's all been okayed by the tolerance organization. So I'm going to move from that into talking about the literature that goes on in the, or that is connected with this unit. Happy snow day, Andrea. You're canceled
Really?
tomorrow. Yeah.
Cool.
My phone's been buzzing, so.
The funny thing is, though, we don't have, we're not supposed to have snow days because we're virtual.
Yeah.
But they still give us a snow day. I don't know. Call me crazy.
Hey, we just found out today we don't have to report because in our contract it says duty-free snow days, and we haven't gotten any memorandum of change for that. So if I get a snow day, sleeping in.
Yeah.
Probably not, but I won't be going in.
So once again, if the world were a village, this is a great source book. In this, you should be going back into the languages, the religions. You can read the school and work because that will be talked about a little bit later on, and money and possessions. And so these are those quick, short references if you haven't used it yet. So it's just a real short reading, and you can just focus on so much in a quick amount of time. So we do suggest, if the world were a village, also This Child, Every Child. This was probably my favorite book to get kids into a discussion.
Yeah.
They were so easy because it's always talking about children that's their age, and they connected to it very quickly. But there are pages about schooling. Let's see, boys and girls, if they're treated equally. And this becomes a real subject when we get to our next piece of literature. And then also working, children working. Our students are not used to the thought that they are at the age that other countries' children may not be going to school, but they may be working to help out their families. So they're always a little shocked by that. Our main textbook is Small Acts of Amazing Courage. This is our
2 thumbs up.
yeah, this is our first of 2 books, and these books run from Unit 4 into Unit 5. So it's Small Acts of Amazing Courage, and then All My Noble Dreams, and then What Happens. They're both by Gloria Wellen, and it's kind of like a part 1 and part 2. So with these, we don't necessarily think you're going to have the time to read every page. Now, sometimes you're able to work it in because you're more of a whole class learner or teacher, so you're teaching all subjects, and it can become part of your literature also. Other times you're trying to fit it into your social studies, and it's too hard. I mean, we realize that. So there is a teacher's guide for each of these books. If you read through the questions in each chapter, they will help steer you to the correct area that you want to read. In chapter 1, they start talking about the fact that Rosalind is the main character. Her parents are from England. She is being raised in India because her father is part of the military. And so she is in a nursery initially. She is very young. And the mother and dad have just lost their son, who was sent back to Britain for schooling. They hire an Anya, which is a very cheap nursemaid, and the mother realizes she has a young child the same age as Rosalind. So initially, she is allowed to bring her to the nursery, and the girls are raised together. And so the Indian baby is learning English, and Rosalind is learning Hindu, and everything is fine until Rosalind gets old enough and mom says, don't ever speak a word of it around your dad. He is a military officer, and so he's not excited about her learning a whole lot about the ways of the Indian culture. And when he returns, the child is no longer allowed to be educated. She is being tutored or sent to the local school, depending on what part of the story you're in, and is no longer allowed, supposedly, to see her friend Isha, except for she does on the sly, and that's where the courage piece comes in. But her father feels she needs to only talk to English children, and so they go to the club where she can interact with English girls, which Rosalind finds quite boring. She finds the girls boring. She finds that there's really nothing to learn, and she's really interested in the India culture. There's a lot of questions in this book. She ends up being introduced to Gandhi. She goes to one of his rallies, ends up being arrested with a friend of hers, and ends up getting out cheap because they recognize her as an officer's daughter. And so she starts seeing the inequity very, very quickly. This brings up a lot of pieces of history, even though it's fiction. So it is not based on, I mean, it's not a true story, but it's based on the events that happened. And so if you're reading the questions, you can go to the chapter real quickly and find excerpts to read to your students. I always read the first book because I had Unit 4 and 5. The second book is where I would reference the questions more often, just to get through it. With talking about Gandhi, do you want me to go ahead and talk about the video, Andrea?
Sure.
Okay. Because we used it so often near the end of the year, I bought the DVD of Gandhi so that I had it to show the students, because we would talk about Gandhi and we were reading the story, and they really got interested in exactly who and what he was. We didn't always have time for the whole movie, and so I would grab parts of it and show them, and our discussion and lesson went on as time allowed. We have found that Gandhi is on YouTube right now. It's on as a movie. It's also on as snippets. So that's to your advantage. You don't have to buy the DVD, but we need to let you know that we know at some point it's going to be pulled off, because that's a copyright piece. I don't know who uploaded it, but you have it to your advantage right now. So we really suggest using all of the sources just to get the point across. One of the scenes in the movie that my students were always fascinated with, because he's always promoted as this peaceful person, even though he was running up against Britain. And if you haven't seen the movie, they are going into a protest and the military is all on horses. And he just says, everybody lay down. Stay right next to each other, get really close, but lay down. And the horses, if they can't see the ground as normal, they won't go forward because they're not comfortable. So when all these bodies lay down next to each other, they become very unsure and they won't trample them. They just stay right on the outside. And the students just really got mesmerized by that scene. And they were like, so he really was peaceful. I mean, they didn't shoot, they didn't do anything. And it's like, well, they weren't doing anything. They all just laid down. So then they see how the officers of the British Army respond to that. And, you don't need to show the entire movie, but just showing that one section and then talking about it really got them to understand there is a difference between one way of protesting and a peaceful protest. So we suggest using all of those sources. I don't know, was it Kathy? You suggested using a refugee's book. I mean, all of those things are worthwhile. If you've got something, supplement it into the program. So those are all our connections for this unit. There's more for Unit 5.
We're going to keep going, and we're going to talk a little bit about Unit 4, Lesson 2. And so that takes us into South Asia. So if you think about it, like Sharon was just talking about, we had discussed briefly, we had discussed Europe. Then we talked about, or we were talking about culture and that, and then the spread of it. And then we get into this book, this wonderful book, and it's kind of bringing those two cultures together, both the English or the British culture along with the Indian culture. And we see, what takes place there. So first of all, just to introduce the kids to South Asia, we get them familiar with some of the physical characteristics in that. So I gotta pull my, whoops, where'd it go? Pull that up. And then there's some really interesting things that when you point them out to the students and you kind of work your way through it, then that's when they start to understand that it's really, it's kind of interesting how the, you know, how India has in its own way become somewhat isolated from other parts of Asia. So let me share my screen. And let's see, here we go. Okay. So we take them through, and this is a short one, and we talk about what are some of the physical conditions, and then of course then we will also reference human conditions, so what's happening. So we give them a locator map, talk to them a little bit about South Asia. Hopefully they remember from Unit 2 that they recognize that India, located there, is the second largest population in the world. And if they remember the projections that that could potentially change in the future as far as who's number one and who's number two in the world population. But again, we start to take a closer look at it and talk about the that part of the continent of Asia. I like this when we've used a comparison of Texas, and it also shows the same latitude, which we've done that previously with some of the South America map and the map of China when we compared it to the United States and that. So it helps them to get a little bit better understanding of what it must be like. You know, if they have some clues about, let's say, for instance, the climate in Texas, that might help them with the climate in the very northern part of India. They also, again, going back and referencing the Unit 2, the world population in the 10 most or 12 most populous countries. Not only is India located right there, but also its neighbor just to the east or to the west of it, Pakistan, and also Bangladesh. So there's a lot of people in this one area, immediate area in Asia. And so again, we're talking about that anything south of what normally is, when we think about Texas, it gets pretty warm down there, especially in the summer. It would be even warmer for the majority of the country of India. And then it has some access to water, and that is also has an effect, and it's probably one of the reasons then that that was so attractive to the British in the British Navy. Some other things, the plates, the mountains, when those plates are moving, how they're moving up, and that most of the time, the kids know that these are the Himalayas. If not, you know, it's easy to go over, but they find that fascinating that that continues, you know, because of that, the plates moving, that the mountains, I tell them, they continue to grow, slow rate, but they continue to grow, and they're getting even taller. So, and then so we talk about how that is a natural boundary or border, and especially, you know, prior to modern technology, that would have isolated or kept people out, or in the other case, kept people in, depending upon what side that you were on. Some great pictures, Mount Everest. I like this one. The kids always like this one. If they haven't been to Sleeping Bear Dunes, they've heard about it. And so they just love to see that connection with Michigan, and then trying to compare that with some of the other, not only Mount Everest, but Pikes Peak. So another kind of fun thing for them to look at with the elevations. And of course, we give them the answers. This one, sometimes they don't pick up on this detail, so it is important to remind them of that this can cause things to change, especially with the jet stream and these mountains being so tall, that'll have an effect then on the climate later on. And this is what ends up creating those monsoon seasons. So let's see, we're gonna get the other one out. The next one has the physical, some of the other physical features, and that is where there's 3 different physical features that we really focus on for India, and that includes the Himalaya mountains, and then also we'll look at the desert to the west. And let's see, I think that's it. Yep. So I'll just go through these really quickly, but we're talking about that concept of monsoons when it's the heavy rain in the summer, but then it's going to become very dry in the winter. And so that is that combination of the jet stream and both and the mountains as well. So here we have it in the winter, and the winds are blowing from the north, and so they're not picking up that moisture over the ocean and that. And so it tends to be very dry in that part or that time of year in India. And then we see when the winds change, the jet streams changes and so the summer months is that monsoon season with a heavy amount of rain. In some cases up to 300 inches in the summer. So the kids are just blown away by that. So we have a few more about the mountains. Obviously, with that effect of rain and many of these rivers starting high up in the mountains, that's going to have an impact on what happens further downstream with flooding and that. And there are some lessons in Unit 4, Lesson 2, that talk about the rivers and how important that is to their everyday lives, the people of India and the surrounding countries and that. I'm going to skip a few of these and just get down here. So this is where we see that the 3 different physical features that kind of form this boundary or border, and we've referred to it as a fence. So we have the Himalaya mountains at the north. We have the Thar Desert, very dry area, dry location. And so that really limits, it was difficult back in time in history to be able to travel across the desert. So that became a natural boundary or deterrent for people to either leave India or to try to enter. And then over to the east, we have these deep valleys and the rivers there. And because of the flooding and the rain and that, become very, very treacherous. So those were difficult to also be able to cross over to either go into India or for the culture of India to spread beyond that. Then we take a comparison, and this was previous. These are some of the maps that we had when we talked about religions. So we see that the followers of Hinduism, that they're pretty much concentrated just in that area of India. And so again, we see how those fences really did kind of contain that particular religion. And then the followers of Islam, we see that there's a difference there of where it spread and how it spread. And again, it gets the kids kind of thinking a little bit more about that effect. So I'm going to stop sharing that for right now. So really that the physical features had such a huge impact in either containing their culture and preventing other cultures from, coming in, diffusing. But then we do find out later on that, especially with the development of larger ships and navies, that people being able to travel greater distances by water, that kind of opened up the area of India to other groups coming in and bringing their cultures in, and vice versa, being able to trade and travel. So that was the physical features. How about the human character, the physical characteristics? How about the human, Sharon?
So I'm going to have you go back in, Andrea. Yep. The human characteristics follow right behind physical, and many of them are due to the physical characteristics. Are you about there to share?
Yeah.
So you're starting with one?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I got to find my button to share. It keeps disappearing on the bottom of my screen. Sorry. Okay.
So, you know, Andrea just went through several of these, but we first make sure the kids remember the difference between a physical characteristic and a human characteristic. We talk about those fences again, because we really want them understanding the location of the three areas that we're talking about and why things did not penetrate very quickly. And they should remember this because you've just done the lessons. So this typically goes fairly quickly. And we talk about Hinduism, and then we start talking about some of the cultural parts of who they were. And we include that caste system. The caste system is talked about quite heavily and in detail in that Small Acts of Amazing Courage. And so it's really easy to flip to those pages. You know, I would bring that up and then I would go, you know, does anyone remember what a caste system is from the vocabulary? And then I would read from the book. Because this is the book I usually read 100%, I would make sure I was about where I wanted to be able to read. But it talks about the caste system in several spots in the book and how it affected Rosalind, even though she was British by her family. She understood that caste system and it bothered her, which is why she took some of the choices she did. And so it's easy to talk about not just the religion, but also about their livelihood and how it affected their livelihood, which has really nothing to do with those borders other than Hinduism was so jammed into India. And so then we review our slide from the religions just to make sure they're aware of it. And we go over the caste system so that if they've missed anything from the vocabulary or they don't quite understand a lot of it, you know, as the teacher, you want to make sure that they really get the gist of all pieces, including being able to marry. And the caste system was very much that they had to marry within their level. They could not marry outside of it. Yep. So then we have a small task for them. I always had them put this in their notebook, and I had them put the laborers, rulers and warriors, untouchables, merchants and farmers, and priests, and rank them from top to bottom. And I had them draw that triangle. They don't have a problem placing the untouchables. 99% of your kids will put the rulers and warriors at the top. And then the other three, or the other three, they're not sure where to put, but they usually end up, after discussing it, decide that the merchants and farmers must be higher than the laborers because they would be the ones working the fields. And so that's kind of their logic. They're extremely surprised when you end up showing them that the priests are the highest rank. And they don't understand that because they don't tend to look at their priest or minister as being higher than them typically at the age of 11 or 12. And so, you know, it it's a good discussion. It's one where you can go back to the story and read part of it, or you can just talk about it yourself. The only difference here is that in our explanation, we talk about Basket Weavers being a separate book. And then it says, and from people who swept roads. In the story, the Untouchables are also the street sweepers. So we need to make them understand that, you know, some of those definitions can be a little bit non-distinguishable, but that, you know, would you want a job where you did nothing but sweep the roads? And so we talked about that, which also gets into transportation with them, because they right away go into the animals and everything. Okay. So this is just your ranking. And so we talk about the fact that, is it possible for people to have occupations different from what they were born into? And then the equal opportunities. And that's typically where I would bring up this child, every child. And is it equal between men and women? Because we've now talked enough to them about other aspects of it. So it's just a really good time to kind of reinforce that. So today, more people are able to marry outside of their group, but you know, it's a good time to talk about the fact that marrying outside of your group doesn't happen just in Southeast Asia. You know, this was very much something in our past from most nationalities. And some of the students will bring up, depending on who they had for their social studies teacher in 5th grade, they will bring up that there was an issue with that from the Pilgrims when our country was founded. So we talk about that fenced off and how it affected religion. If you can just move on to the next piece. Oh, it must be in the next slideshow.
Okay.
So we keep them in that, you know, talking about where they're located as we move through the different sections. I thought it was all in one, so that was my error. Depending on your science teacher, a lot of the kids are familiar with the mountain ranges, the deserts. Our science teachers actually helped our social studies program immensely, that there was a lot of crossover. So, you know, we talk about that fenced in area and why things don't change. And then as Andrea had talked about, we talk again about the ships are now being built and the ships are getting larger. People are learning more. The more they sail, the more they learn. And so they start learning that they can cross either the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal, which allows them to start reaching different parts of the world. And, you know, even if you just ask the students before you hit this next slide, what do you think will happen if they start going to different parts of the world? They immediately say, well, they're going to start buying and selling. So the trade piece comes up very quickly. We talk about what would be traded from Africa and Europeans to, you know, Asia. And so the discussion about what is where, what's planted, what is considered valuable to each of the different areas makes a difference. But then we also talk about the fact that the Arab traders brought the religion of Islam to India. And, you know, they've seen India is jam-packed with Hinduism. And so now their culture is being changed. And the trade continues. They're originally, you know, controlling kind of themselves, and it starts to change the more the British keep coming in because they're stronger, they have an army, but they're also learning more about the monsoon winds. And so I go back and I talk to them about what does monsoon mean, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the monsoon, and they realize that there's these huge extremes, but in the middle, there's some nice wet land and rain. And so we talk about what could they grow there. Some of the kids are already aware that cotton grows there. I think it's more from past knowledge. And then we're able to talk about that the British really liked what they were able to grow in India, and why did India have the rich soil. This is another area where our science teachers did a good job about talking about volcanoes erupting, leaving good earth behind for growth. But then we would also talk about the monsoon season, and so how did that affect the growing season? So we end up going into talking about that they grew a lot of cotton. British wanted cotton, but they wanted it for themselves. And then we end up talking about the fact they wanted it for themselves so that they could actually bring it back and sell it to the people in India. That's also talked about in the book. So this is the reason why I really read the first book to the students, and I reference the second book a lot more. So the British end up coming in and controlling Southeast Asia. They have the ability, because of military, they have the ability because they are more cultured at this point. India has been isolated up until very recently, but once the British get in there, they rule for about 200 years.
Oops, I forgot this one.
I'm sorry, what?
I forgot this one.
Oh, can you back up just one? So the other, oh, no, there should be, did you go? Oh, I skipped ahead. I'm sorry. Go back to the one you were at. Yeah, the pink and yellow. So this one shows where the pink is where British ruled primarily. They had the ruling of everything. But then we also talk about that the yellow was still governed by the princes, but they cooperated with the British. And so the kids say, well, then, you know, they were actually being ruled by the British overall. And they start realizing, one of my students compared it to the yellow as being in my classroom, but I was the overall ruler and had the fair say. But I was underneath my principal. And so they kind of made their own connections with it. So we would go from that and then talk about, with all kinds of things that maybe that we're looking at that aren't good for India, you know, what good did the British Empire do? Did they do any good? And that's where we come in with, you know, they did build railroads that were actually very efficient. And then the universities went in, which became more technical universities, and schools which taught English to the children. And of course, then we talk about that caste system again. Did everyone get education or not? And then we talk about, as this slide continues, as to how that has continued to today. Our movie and our music productions are still very heavily from India. Software, kids know that if you make a lot of phone calls, you're going to get somebody who doesn't sound exactly like we do. And so they do see that there were positives or pros with the British taking over, but there also were a lot of things where, you know, India wanted to be their own country. They wanted to govern themselves.
Some review questions.
And then we review the questions. We should have answers to them, I believe.
Nope.
No? Oh, okay. Carol, can't hear you. Is this Carol or is this?
It must be Carol because,
Okay.
but I don't hear her.
I don't either.
Yeah, you got to unmute, Carol. So hover at the bottom of your Zoom window and the bar will come up and you'll see to the bottom left where you can unmute yourself. Bottom left.
Mute. How's that?
So,
There we go.
Can you see, or should I do a bigger screen?
That looks good.
Okay. All right. I'm going to be talking in a little bit more detail, especially using pictures, about the pros and cons of being a colony. We have added a lesson 3 that we didn't used to have in this unit, and it focuses on colonies. And since we've been talking about South Asia, we're going to talk about was British a good thing, a bad thing, both? And so here we go. I was trying to remind students with this map that the eastern United States in the 1700s and South Asia have something in common. And would your students know what that is? Okay. If we go to the next slide, both the eastern U.S., the 13 colonies, and South Asia were colonies that were ruled by the British Empire. And to point that out even further, it seems to me that going by sea was a whole lot easier for Great Britain to go to the eastern U.S. instead of having to go around Africa to get to South Asia. That was a really long trip. Just to make a point, this is kind of a famous picture of Queen Victoria back in the late 1800s. And not only was she Queen of Great Britain, but she was also the Empress of India, because Great Britain ruled India, meaning at that time the whole chunk of South Asia. And just to bring it back to the relationship to us, her grandfather, King George, was the king that the 13 colonies rebelled against and succeeded after a Revolutionary War in leaving the Empire of Great Britain. And then we get to the question, was being a colony of the British Empire, was that good? Was that bad? Was that both? And we're going to look at some paintings that are public domain, thank goodness, to help us think about, as the students, this is the first time I've ever pulled these together, so let me know if you have a problem with them, we will fix. But the students are going to look at paintings and they're going to say, is the British helping? Are the British harming these millions of people who they now govern? Maybe they're doing both in the same picture. And the point is for the students to explain why they're answering the way they do. So here we go. Early on, the trading company, the ships that first came to India. And actually, these ships fought the French and threw them out of ports. They fought the Spanish and the Portuguese and threw them out of ports in India, so that the British controlled most of the ports of India. And this was for 100 years, right about the time before we had our Revolutionary War. The point is that the British East India Company had a powerful army and a navy. They were a group of rich investors, and they wanted products, especially cotton. And I just thought it would help for the students to see who are the people who were having to produce the cotton, and what does this picture say to you about the people who were there? Actually, some of them you see have rifles. They are going to rebel against the British East India Company. Why did they rebel? There were people who were terribly upset. This is so much about the functions of government. This may be several hundred years ago, but it's so much about people pay taxes, and taxes were not necessarily money. The British East India Company could force workers to spend a month growing cotton, or they could force workers to build a road. That was the tax that was imposed through sometimes those princes in the yellow areas. And there were people in 1857 who wanted to rebel against the British East India Company because they thought the amount of tax was unfair. I think those same laborers had always had to pay taxes, had to work a certain number of days for the princes or the landowners, but their concern was they were having to work, and what were they getting back in return? Others, and this is where religion comes in, others, particularly soldiers who worked for the British, they felt that they were being forced to violate Hindu and Muslim religion, particularly regarding touching unclean things. For Hindus, touching anything with beef was unclean. For Muslim, touching anything that was pork was unclean. So you get a feeling that there were people who thought they were being harmed. Last picture. I do need to bring up a little bit more about the princes. Here's a prince. In 1857, there was a huge rebellion. Lots of people died fighting against the British Redcoats. The British Redcoats won. They had better weapons. They had cannons. The official folks who were defeated were, remember those yellow areas on the map? They were the Muslim princes. Now, the Muslim princes would have, after they were defeated by the British, would have much less power for 100 years. All of their descendants would have much less power. It's kind of like the local teacher in the classroom really had to do what the principal said. And oftentimes the problem is the principal was far away in England. Now, just another kind of visual apart from a picture. Remember how there was a dry season? It's the opposite of lake effect. It's when the wind blows from the land out to the water. The British did build a huge irrigation system. It was the largest irrigation system. They built 300 miles of, or 350 miles of huge canals, and then hundreds and hundreds of miles of littler canals, because when you have a dry season and you're still trying to grow something, you can grow a whole lot more if you have water during the dry season. And those canals remain till today. As we said before, the British also built a railroad system. Now, this was in their interest because they needed to get that wonderful cotton from the fields and the farms where it was being grown to the shipping ports, to the Bay of Bengal and to the Arabian Sea. And it's the South Asian workers who had to do the heavy layer to build the railroad. So you see some very self-interest in what the British did, and yet the railroad did remain after finally, after work by people like Gandhi, after finally there was a breaking away from Britain. These are pictures of the still existing universities. This is a medical college that was made. The British built this college. They almost 50% of the government, the people who kept roads and railroads and shipments of food going for hundreds of millions of people in South Asia. Half of the workers in the government had gone to college, founded by the British, and 43% were Hindu, and a much smaller percent, like 15%, were Muslim. And then just some examples, and maybe y'all can take a look and see if these make sense. Did the British do a good thing or a bad thing when they forced farmers to grow opium, which then the British traders took to China and sold there? I wanted to point out that in number 3, there were Muslim princes who ruled before the British came. And if you want to talk about displeasure with government, the people, many Hindus who lived under the thumb of Muslim princes, were not happy. They have long, long memories of being oppressed, particularly in the droughts of dry season when the Muslim princes just let people die. There's hundreds of years of anger at what governments were doing before the British arrived. The British didn't. The British did try to move food around on railroads, but they still could not eliminate famines. It's just the Muslim princes had done really badly by comparison. Let's see. Yeah. And interesting, today, whenever I read The Economist, for example, which happens to be published in Britain, the writers in The Economist point out that India is the world's largest democracy, and a democracy that works pretty well, better than other democracies. And number six is trying to point out that the British brought the notion that you really need to let people vote. Now, there was an empire, people didn't get to vote on getting out of the empire, but they did get to vote on local government. They did expect that there would be laws and lawyers and courts. They could elect their local city mayors and their local city councils. There's this 100 years of enforcing the notion of there is such a thing as democracy and people can do it. So hopefully students would see that that's a good thing. Yeah. So that we could do a summary about that. So let me get out of this one. Let's see. Let me go to another one if I can find it. Can you see the next one okay? Here, I'll get, I can't, I'll minimize. Okay, there we go. To move beyond just looking at the British and British colonies, we have a short PowerPoint that is going to look at what European nations other than the British, how they dealt with colonies, where they had colonies. And as we've been saying before, after 1492, or the world changed with the sailing of Columbus.
Carol, I don't think we're on the same PowerPoint.
Carol,
Oh, okay.
Carol, what I think you have to do is I think you have to stop sharing
Okay.
and then open up the other PowerPoint
Okay.
and share again.
Very good. Europe.
Try that.
Is this working now? No.
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, can you see this one okay now?
Not yet.
Or can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I gotta move stuff. All right. So what I'm going to do is point out once again that a small group of countries in Europe, less than 5% of the world's population, claim the right to rule over more than 80% of the world. They left their ports in Europe. It wasn't just leaving England, which together with other parts of these islands was called Great Britain. It wasn't just England, it was Spain, Portugal, France, the Dutch and Netherlands, a few German colonies, a few Italian colonies. And the idea is that we have this subcontinent, this small subcontinent, is sending and grabbing land essentially in all these other parts of the world. Notice the B is for Britain, the F is for France. It just looks like a hodgepodge of colonies. Those ships were really out there. Just a little bit, I don't know if anybody will find this insulting, but sometimes when we talk about the purpose for having a colony, we could simplify it to say these European, whether it was French or British or Spanish, they had purposes. One we might categorize as gold, the other is God, and the other is glory. And just for a few examples of that, glory, there was a certain amount of prestige in controlling other people. But I think mainly, do you remember how the Spanish got gold from the mountains in the South America? How the British wanted the cotton of India? The French, when they were in North America, were particularly interested in spreading Christianity. This is an example of a very early Roman Catholic mission church in what is now Texas, brought by Spanish-speaking priests. So what I'm going to do is just real quickly point out Great Britain's colonies, France's colonies, Spain's colonies, and Portugal's colonies. And I think students should remember those countries, so we have a little quiz. What we're going to be looking at when we look at these just 4 European countries is which one had the most colonies spread out over most of the world. And just notice how far away from Europe those colonies were. And just for a bit of culture, watch for what language they were spreading. So here's a map of Portuguese colonies. Do you remember those tropic lines that we talk about when we're in Unit 1? Notice how Portugal's colonies are between kind of both sides of the equator in very tropical places. This is what is now Brazil. Some colonies in Africa. The Portuguese did try to have some colonies in South Asia until the British Navy basically forced them out. So these are colonies. They could have been temporary. They could have been longer. Where were Spain's colonies? Oh, yeah. If you've ever met somebody from Brazil, Brazilians speak Portuguese. Spain, Portugal's neighbor, notice it's a little bit different pattern than the Portuguese. Notice how many of the Spanish colonies were in the Americas, with a few in Africa, and major colony for a while was in the Philippines, but then the United States kicked Spain out of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. France, remember French colonies? Will the students from 5th grade remember French colonies in North America? French colonies, the French were competing with the British. You know, part of the reason why the United States could beat Great Britain from 1775 to 1781, 1776 to 1781, because Great Britain was over here in India fighting the French and the Spanish. So that's a pattern of French colonies. How far from France? And finally, British colonies. So the question is, who had the greatest extent of colonies? Who controlled the most land on the most continents? Well, it was Great Britain. They had claimed the most land. They had bragged that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And then we have some questions to review. What languages were spread to the colonies, what the goals were, and this time I do have answers, at least for part of it. Yeah. Okay. So this is about colonies. Let's see, I have to check. Well, we're getting pretty late. I'm gonna put this one down. Should we do some wrapping up? I had one more thing I could show you about how horrible when Gandhi and the people who worked with Gandhi were able to expel, get rid of the British Empire. South Asia had horrible conflict after it got divided up into countries. Or maybe I can just leave you that with a teaser. There was major strife, bloodshed. Millions of people moved around because they didn't want to be, they were Muslims and they didn't want to be in the country of India, which was mostly Hindu. It was a horrible conflict of cultures. Maybe not necessarily because of beliefs, but because it's like this notion of belonging to a group that was an underdog, that was a minority, how terrible it was to be a religious minority in a country. It makes you wonder about groups that are fighting with each other today. So, but we should probably be wrapping up, and I should end sharing, right?